the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here, and I really hope that you've been enjoying the conversations that you've been listening to, and hopefully finding some tips, some next steps that you can take if you struggle with similar feelings of self-doubt, which obviously, as you're hearing, are fairly universal. This is something that we all go through from time to time. When I started this podcast, my goal was really to try to normalize the experience, to let everybody know that you are not alone, that there's a name for what you're feeling, and that there are steps that we can be taking to manage it more effectively. What I have found over the course of these conversations has been fascinating. I have had an absolutely powerful and different conversation with every single person who I have interviewed. I worried at one point that there may not be enough to talk about. How much is there to say about imposter syndrome? Are the stories going to start to get repetitive? That has absolutely not been the case. Everyone brings a fascinating new perspective to this conversation. I have learned something from every discussion that we've had. I hope you have too. I want to make a note that many of these recordings are being done during the social distancing that's happening with coronavirus. I am doing my best to protect the sound quality, but we are all in homes that have pets, kids, all kinds of background noise going on. For me, it's much more important to share with you a very natural conversation between two people than it is to share a perfectly polished recording. So I hope that you will bear with us if there are moments where the sound is not perfect. Really, my goal is to share stories, not to provide perfectly scripted, perfectly polished audio. So apologies for any imperfections that may be coming through in the recordings, but I'm hoping that you're getting the essence of the message regardless. So thank you again for being here. I wish you all the best and hope that you will consider sharing your own story one day. Thanks again. Welcome, Ariell. I am so excited to have you here, and we've already begun our conversation behind the scenes, so I'm excited to continue this with you. But before we jump in, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to us.
Hi, thank you, Kim. It's actually a huge pleasure to be here. I'm very excited that you even made this opportunity for women like myself to be able to come and share part of this conversation that I think needs to be had. So a little bit about me. I recently became self-employed. I do quite a few different things. I sell Beautycounter, which is an ethical skincare line. I'm a runway model. I'm a blogger and a freelance writer, and I'm also an epic table organizer. I'm passionate about health and wellness, advocacy, and the arts. So that's just a little bit about me.
Wow.
And I'm from Kansas City.
Oh, great. Wow, you do have a very diverse set of activities and interests that you're working on today. That's really interesting. I'm sure we'll talk more about that too as we get into this, because transitions are a very common trigger of imposter syndrome. So I'll be interested to hear how, as you've been transitioning into these new areas, how, if at all, imposter syndrome has shown up for you. But why don't we start with just the opening question that I generally ask, which is, what does imposter syndrome mean to you?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I've been thinking about that obviously quite a bit as I've been preparing to chat with you. And honestly, it shows up in most areas of my life. Even to the point that I was realizing even a few days ago that, my gosh, sometimes I don't act, it's almost like I feel like I'm an imposter in my own skin, that I don't even trust my own opinions or my own insight on things, my own voice, my own belief about my future, that I'm almost not even allowed to show up to be me, that I'm an imposter in myself. In terms of, like how we've mentioned about that I've just recently become self-employed. I mean, with imposters, that's also shown up as, do I have a right to create my own legacy? Can I become financially successful? Can I become self-sustaining? Can I have, I desire to have influence as well too. Like, am I an imposter in those different ways? And, honestly, I feel like the more that I think about it, the more I kind of wonder, in what areas of my life do I not feel like I'm an imposter?
And those are really weighty questions to have as you're going through this, and very normal questions that I think we all experience as we're navigating new territory. And especially, I think, too, going from being employed to being self-employed, there's something about that, at least in my experience, I can remember thinking, who am I, right? Who am I to be this business owner, or to somehow claim to have expertise that others would want to seek out, right? There's just a lot of self-doubt that naturally comes into that transition. I'm curious because you're describing some really heavy questions and self-doubts, but you're doing it anyway. So how are you getting through all of that and continuing to follow through on your goals?
Well, that's another really good question. I would say, honestly, it depends on the day. Some days are better than others. Other days, there are some days where I just don't have it. I don't have it in me to even think about the possibility of becoming successful or getting out there or doing the grind or any of those things. And I just separate myself and sit on the couch and watch Netflix and give myself the opportunity to be able to separate, but other times, I think the biggest drive I have for me, and one of the biggest reasons why I jumped out from self-employment and jumped out into self-employment from the corporate world, was I kept having this one thought over and over and over in my mind last summer, which is that time is not a renewable resource. So I couldn't stop thinking about the version of myself 10 years down the road and what she would think about my decision if I were to leave the corporate world. And I knew that she would be going, yes, do it. Absolutely. Make the jump. Like, take the leap. You're going to be fine. It's going to be great. But that's looking at it from a macro level perspective. That's going, girl, you're going to be great. You're going to be fine. Your bills are going to be taken care of. That you're wired this way. You're not wired to be in a corporate world. That's for sure. Like, that's been very, very clear to you. Your parents have been telling you this for years. And you're finally, it's finally gotten through your thick head that they're right, actually know what they're talking about. So why not believe in yourself to be able to do those things? But, when you're actually in it, then it's the day and day of like, well, shoot, I mean, do I have what it takes to be able to do those things? Do I have what it takes to be able to show up in my own life and to assert myself as an expert in, these particular areas that I'm branching out in? I feel like I lost your question. What was your question?
No, that was absolutely not. And
I got on a roll there.
No, that's perfect, because you actually got me thinking about a couple things. Number one is what you're talking about as the drive, right? Is that really powerful vision, that really powerful sort of force, right? That tells us there's something better for us out there, right? There's more out there that we want to have. And like you said, that's a very macro level experience. So in the moments when we feel connected to it, it's really, really powerful. And it can help us get through the micro level self-doubt and the things that we're talking about, right? But what you're describing too, which is very tied to this, is that on an everyday basis, it looks very different. It's a lot easier to take the balcony level view of yourself 10 years from now, right, than it is to every day kind of work through the steps that are required to get to that point. And so I think you're painting a very real picture of the various forces at play when we're trying to make these types of transitions.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, it's that whole concept of, okay, so this is a leap of faith, right? Mm-hmm. So thinking through each steps of that, there is a run towards it, which can be super exciting. Like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I'm so happy. I'm going to make this jump for myself. I'm going to do it. I'm fueled. I'm fired up. Like, I've made the decision, that whole thing. And then there's the and then you jump, and then now you're extended in space, and there's a free fall. And there's such a series of emotions that you go through as, you're falling. It's fear, and oh my gosh, am I going to be caught? And, this ground is getting a lot closer. Like, was this actually a good idea? Should I have actually just run off a cliff into a complete unknown? I mean, we'll find out, right? So, I mean, there's just this, like, it looks glamorous. And I think sometimes it feels glamorous to be able to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to become self-employed. I'm going to be that woman that is going to inspire others. I'm going to be that person that's going to, put a stake in the ground and go, you know what? Like, legacy starts with me. And I am going to reverse just the old ways of thinking about, like, what's possible and all those different things. Like, that sounds great. And it's not that those things are lost in that moment. It's just that it's both and, all of a sudden it's okay. That's the big picture. And this really sucks right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know how this is going to come together. And I know this is the right decision. And I know I'm going to be happy about it from 10 years from now. But my goodness, I need to get through today and tomorrow to get through to that 10 years down the road goal of knowing that I will be looking back on this and going, this was a great decision, Ariell. You did a good thing.
And you mentioned that giving into that feeling sometimes is a way of coping with it too, right? So to just give yourself a day off and binge Netflix, right? Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that, part of what challenges us is how much pressure we put on ourselves. And sometimes we just need to give ourselves some space to take care of ourselves and relax and not always be thinking about what's the next step and how do we get there.
Totally. And actually, to be real, okay, so I have so many thoughts about this, but really when it comes to, even right now, at the time of this podcast, we're in the middle of a quarantine. At least in my area, we're at the very end of the tail end of a quarantine happening. And so normal is different for everyone, as well as, it's almost like, and I've been believing this for quite a while, is that I think that there is a dying off of the old way of doing business and a new way of walking into what business is going to be and what business can be in the future. And I find that to be really exciting, but it's also an unknown, right? So there's moments during the middle of this quarantine where, I've had to just go, even before we got onto this podcast, we're talking about just the mess of social media. When you have that constant input of other people that are, they're killing it, they're rocking it. We're in the middle of a quarantine and they're bringing in all kinds of new business and they've never been better and that sort of a thing. And really, I've had to just look at that and go, you know what? That's just not my normal. And that's okay. Like, I'm not missing out. There's that deep fear in me that goes, shoot, like I'm wasting time. Like I'm losing out on this stuff. I'm being told that if I don't do X, Y, Z during these times that I'm failing. But really it's just that, okay, no, I'm okay. We're going to be okay. But for right now, what I need to do is I'm going to literally turn my phone off and I'm going to turn on Netflix. I'm going to make my favorite food. I'm going to go for a long walk and I'm not going to do anything else because I really feel like when we talk about imposter syndrome, for me, I've found the biggest thing that I need to do is to separate and do the internal work. Because it's the internal work that I think is really what's going to make me successful. In successful meaning fully being who I'm supposed to be, but I have these blockages. So allowing myself to do that, I think, is important.
I'm so glad you said that because I do think that we have a tendency to get really caught up in the action steps and the external type of work. And part of that is that we are trying to keep up with everybody around us, as you're describing. And part of it is that we don't feel productive unless we're checking things off of a list. And inner work doesn't show up as that kind of work, right? And so much of the experience that you're talking about of how we respond to the different messages that we get on LinkedIn or, social media more generally, or just the ways in which we compare ourselves to people around us is a function of how we see ourselves from an internal perspective. And we just, unfortunately, don't often give ourselves the time to really work on that part of ourselves. And so I love that you're looking at it that way and recognizing that's not wasted time, right? That's really when the magic happens.
No, not wasted time at all. I completely agree. And I think it's one of the things that I've had to, even before I left my corporate job, I took about 6 weeks off social media. And I know we're picking on social media a lot, or I'm picking on social media a lot, but really that's what I had to do to shut down everything and just go, you know what, for the next 6 weeks, I'm about to make one of the biggest decisions of my life. And the best thing that I can do is do everything I can to mentally and emotionally prepare. Because if I don't believe I can make money, I believe it's going to be much harder for me to make money. So what do I have to do? I have to actually deal with that belief. If I don't believe that I'm not going to have the opportunities and have the conversations and have the influence that I want to have with people, if I don't believe that I don't have something worth saying or I don't have a product worth selling, I'm going to have a hard time doing that. So I have to actually deal with that belief. So it's been something I've really been trying to focus on.
What does that look like? What does the inner work look like for you? Because again, it doesn't lend itself to checklists and, kind of things that we generally prefer. How have you been approaching that whole process of examining, challenging your current beliefs, reframing?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely a society that is addicted, and I think as people, we can tend to be this way, to objective rather than subjective sort of subject matters. Like, it is so much easier and so much more comfortable to be able to have some sort of well, this is your how-to to do that, rather than just diving into the subjective. So for me, I mean, honestly, that's really varied. I've really enjoyed Jen Sincero's books. Have you heard of her before?
Oh yeah, the badass books.
Yeah, I love her You Are a Badass book, and then You Are a Badass at Making Money. And really, they're really just two books that they're just about dealing with the internal work to be able to become the successful version of you. So those are a couple things that I've done. Affirmations. I try and have a morning routine and an evening routine, and I found that that's really helped me to be able to kind of center myself and bring some sort of normalcy and kind of bring me back down to earth. That's really helped me. But to be really honest, I'm fumbling through most of it. But I will say this, is that as I'm fumbling through it, I just know and I believe that is a huge key for me to become the best version of myself. So I just keep pursuing that. So every day it can just look different. So yeah.
I love
just
your
take it one day at a time.
Yeah, I love that you're being very honest about that and saying that you're fumbling through. But I think fumbling, even the fact that you see it as fumbling through, is a function of what we were just talking about, which is there is no how-to for this, right? So it feels like fumbling because we have to make it up. But there's no blueprint or one size fits all approach to working through this. It is a bit of a trial and error process, right? You seek out certain resources. The Jen Sincero books is a perfect example of that, right? I think that's a great tip for people, but they're not all going to resonate with everybody, right? So for you found something that speaks to you, and having routine is something that I think is also really helpful, especially in this moment. But we don't know ourselves as well as we could. And so a lot of this is really going to be trying out something, seeing if it works, and then if not, trying out something else. So it feels like fumbling, but really it's just testing and figuring out how to maneuver this very uncharted ground.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, is that it is uncharted territory. So, for me as an individual in this skin to become self-employed, that's new ground for me. So that new ground means I've never been here before with all this junk I have in my backpack of self-doubt and, just the different things that I've dealt with in my life, to be able to go, okay, well, let's work at being fully successful in being self-employed. I'm not going to fully know what that looks like. So it is going to be fumbling around to go, okay, well, let's figure out how to do this.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like how you said that about the backpack too, right? Because I think that's a really great way of capturing the fact that we do have a lot of stuff that we carry around with us. And this is unfamiliar ground to everybody. But the good thing about what you're doing is you're not skipping ahead. And I think that temptation to want to just immediately step into action, to want to just start selling, right? Start doing whatever it is that your work looks like. It feels again like the productive thing to do. But this part, if it's not addressed, will come back to haunt you. And I don't mean just you personally, right? I mean all of us, right? We can only skip it for so long until it creeps up on us, and we're going to have to take the time to work through it. So it might as well start at the beginning.
Right. No, exactly. And I think, to be able to get there, it's that vulnerability piece, right? To be able to go, okay, this is truly what I'm dealing with. And this is exactly what this is exactly what I'm feeling. And this is what I have to get through to get there. And really the reality is that, there's not another option. Like, you have to be able to get to your end goal. We have to go through and actually deal with these different things. We can circumvent it for a while, but it truly will always come back.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to the drive piece too, right? Because in my view, and this is probably overly simplistic, but the alternative is to go back to your old way of life, which made you unhappy, right? So you already know what that looks like. You already know why it's not a good fit. And so there's definitely some discomfort and uncertainty in the path that lies ahead, but it's a much more fulfilling path for you. It's much more aligned with who you are and what you want than where you came from.
Yes, exactly.
So I really appreciate your being so honest and vulnerable with us. What made you decide to want to tell your story, and what are you hoping people will take away from it?
So I just think that there's such power in telling our stories. I think that in a world where, and I feel like most of us know this, right? It's just that, it's since it's a social media world, there's a bit of a mask that a lot of us, or some of us, I should say, wear. I definitely do at times. And I think it's important that we take off that I help to take off that mask as well for myself. So I wanted to come on here today because I just wanted to tell my story. I think it's important to, if it helps anyone at all, that would make me very happy.
I love that, Ariell. I think this has been such a great conversation, and I have no doubt that people are going to get value from it. Your honesty and the emphasis that you're placing on self-reflection, it's such a powerful message. And I really am so grateful that we had a chance to talk today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share it with other women who can benefit from this conversation. Before we go, I want to share some additional resources with you. If you struggle with imposter syndrome and you want to manage it more effectively, I invite you to join my free Impostor Syndrome online challenge. Every day for 7 days, you'll get an email with self-reflection questions and exercises to help you better understand your own experience with imposter syndrome and how to navigate it more effectively. To join the free challenge, visit executive-career-success.com/imposter-syndrome-challenge. When you sign up, you'll immediately receive your first message. Also, if you're interested in joining a community of women who engage in candid conversations that generally aren't happening elsewhere, I invite you to join my Leading Women discussion group. On the first and third Thursday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern, we meet virtually over Zoom to talk about questions or challenges related to career management, leadership development, and any other relevant topics such as imposter syndrome and confidence. It's always a great discussion with a great group of women. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to be my guest on a future call. Just reach out to me at kim@executivecareersuccess.com and I will share the call details with you. And if you want to join my newsletter to receive tips, insights, and updates, text Leading Women, all one word, to 66866. Finally, consider telling us your story. Contact me to learn more about how you can be a guest on the Impostor Syndrome Files. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.